Our New Testament reading this morning comes from Romans chapter 5, verses 12 through 19. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death came through sin, and so death spread to all because all have sinned. Sin was indeed in the world before the law, but sin is not reckoned when there is no law. Yet death exercised dominion from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sins were not like the transgression of Adam, who is a type of the one who was to come. But the free gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died through the one man's trespass, much more surely have the grace of God and the free gift and the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abounded for the many. And the free gift is not like the effect of the one man's sin. For the judgment following one trespass brought condemnation, but the free gift following many trespasses brings justification. If, because of one man's trespass, death exercised dominion through that one, much more surely will those who receive the abundance of grace and the free gift of righteousness exercise dominion and life through the one man, Jesus Christ. Therefore, just as one man's trespass led to condemnation for all, so one man's act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all. For just as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous. Watching the news often becomes an interesting study in the human condition. One can watch the news and see the effect of the prevailing thoughts in society on life and the human condition. Depending on the news station that one watches, many different factors can be named for what is seen in the news and the bad things that happen on a day-to-day basis. When someone commits a crime, the police and the investigators often look for the motivation for the crime. What reasons does or did the perpetrator give for what they did? Was it a crime of passion? Was he or she driven to the crime because of something that happened, like the loss of a job or the need for money? Were they seeking revenge? Was the crime religiously motivated by their own poor theology, regardless of their religion? Was it a hate crime that was driven by racism, sexism, classism, or any other ism or phobia that we have out there today? But what comes next? For example, take any one of the mass shootings that have made the news in recent years. Think of Dylan Roof in South Carolina. Some argue that easy access to firearms is the issue. Others talk about Dylan's upbringing and things that happened in his life that would have contributed to his actions on that Wednesday night. Some say society was to blame, while others blame it all on mental illness. But the most common thing said by many in Christian circles is that he was just a bad person. We hear that a lot, right? They're just bad people. It wasn't guns, society, or mental illness or mental health to blame, just him and the fact that he was a bad person, a sinner, ruined by sin from birth. And see, sin is something that pervades our theology, even if we don't talk about it a lot. But think about our service each week. Before we hear the word and have the children's sermon, we have our prayer of confession. We confess our sins, corporate and personal, before our God and ask for forgiveness. We know that we need forgiveness because our relationship with God is broken and marred by the things that we do that are contrary to what God has asked of us. Growing up, sin was described, as I told the children, as anything that we do that displeases God. And that is a definition that has stuck in my mind when I think of sin. But there is a broader thought in our Western Christian tradition that prevails and contributes to how we have come to understand sin, not just as a church, but as a society. And this is the theology of original sin. How many out there have heard of that idea? Original sin, yes. It rose to prominence in Christian theology in the early 5th century and has been with us ever since. It is prominent in our Reformed tradition and is throughout our Book of Confessions. Heidelberg 7 asks, "Where then does this corruption of human nature come from?" With the answer being, "From the fall and disobedience of our first parents, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden, whereby our human life is so poisoned that we are all conceived and born in the state of sin." The next question and answer follows. But are we so perverted that we are altogether unable to do good and prone to do evil? Yes, unless we are born again through the Spirit of God. The Second Helvetic Confession insists that full of all wickedness, distrust, contempt, and hatred of God, we are unable to do or even think of anything good of ourselves. We therefore acknowledge that there is original sin in all men. Now the Westminster Confession of Faith. Yes. We are not alone in using this. It is a bedrock of all Reformed tradition. And it says that from this original corruption, by which they mean the fall of Adam and Eve, whereby we are utterly indisposed, disabled, and made opposite to all that is good, and wholly inclined to all evil, do proceed all actual transgressions. I think y'all get the picture. We are all sinners, and the time of Lent is for many a time of penance and renewal. And that's not bad. We need that time. But I also feel that there is something that is missed when we focus everything so much on sin. Did you know that the Western Christian tradition is the only Abrahamic faith tradition that holds to a theology of original sin? This theology is not one that Jesus would have known. It didn't exist. It is not found in Judaism or in Islam, and it is not even a prominent theology in the Eastern Orthodox Christianity. It is just within the Western tradition that spun off of the Western Catholic Church that then filtered down through the Protestant denominations and the Reformation. So if this is the case, and we want to think about the world through a different lens, one that does not put original sin as the starting point of our worldview, how do we reshape it? And how do we find the good news in it? There is a movement among some theologians that call for a theology of original blessing. Original blessing. What a beautiful and still scripturally faithful concept. Original blessing. I first heard of this because I happened to be an NPR junkie. There was an episode of To the Best of Our Knowledge that was playing on my way to orchestra practice one day about a month and a half ago. This episode was all about original sin and the impact that it had on Western society. They had a theologian on named Daniel Schroyer, and she talked about the concept of original blessing. It was a term first used by a Catholic theologian by the name of Matthew Fox in the 1980s. Now, he's no longer Catholic. It was a radical idea that eventually got him kicked out, and now he's an Episcopal priest. But Danielle Schroyer picked up this phrase and used it as well, calling her book Original Blessing, putting sin in its rightful place. And this concept was so intriguing. Growing up Southern Baptist, I kind of had the sin thing down. Okay, I knew all about it. I knew that I was a sinner. I knew Jesus came to pay the debt of my sin. I knew that I was utterly worthless and horrible without God. But think about that for a minute. Think about the repercussions of a child and of a teenager thinking they are utterly worthless, even if they have faith in God. It still had a large effect on my psyche and how I saw myself in the world, even if that is not how my pastors or my church would have meant for me to understand my relationship with God. It's tough to be told that I am a precious, beautiful child of God in one instance, and then be told I am a wretch and a worthless human being in the next. It's disconcerting. What do you do? But then I think about Romans 5:18 and 19, and kind of how it fits all in. Therefore, just as one man's trespass led to condemnation, so one man's act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all. For just as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous. And I think we forget that. Through Jesus, the rift has already been repaired. And I loved what Danielle Schroyer said in the interview on NPR. She was asked by the interviewer how she would explain to a 10-year-old Baptist child who grew up like I did the concept of original blessing. And here is her beautifully simple answer. You are in a relationship with God. God started it, and God is sticking to it. Let that sink in. It's so beautiful. One man led to condemnation, one leads to justification. God started it, and God stuck with it. See, that's what we miss when the focus of Genesis becomes all about what happened in our passage today. The fall, as described in Genesis 3, is important. But so often we start at Genesis 3 and skip Genesis 1 and 2 completely. We miss the fact that God built this garden, God created humanity in his image, and God started a relationship. It is more important that God established that relationship and that God pursued the relationship to the point of sending Jesus. Original blessing seeks to make the starting point of understanding our faith not about sin, but about grace. About a God who loves us so much that God pursues a relationship with us despite our sin. And isn't that a much more compelling and amazing reason to love our God? To share our good news with others? Not that you're a sinner and you're going to go to hell, but did you know God loves you and has been pursuing a relationship with you from the beginning of the world? The question that many people bring up in attempts to discredit a theology of original blessing often have to do with Jesus. It goes like this. If original blessing is important, and we're saying original sin does not exist, then why Jesus? If we are born with original blessing, then that would change everything. And I would say, yes, it does. But it doesn't negate the need for Jesus. Because the thing is, sin does exist. And that's not the point of original blessing. It's not to say that we don't sin, because we do. But it's to say that despite all the choices we may make that displease God, God still loves us. That's why when I talked to the kids this morning, I asked them, so when you mess up, do you think your parents don't love you anymore? No. No matter what Leela does, I love that girl with all my heart. And the fact that she comes to me later, after she's been in timeout, and says, I'm sorry, Mommy. That's all God asks of us. We recognize, hey, I messed up, and you know what, God, I'm sorry. Help me to be a better person. Original blessing puts sin back in the place it needs to be, not at the center of everything, because that's where God's grace is. If we start with God's love and the relationship God has with us, then we recognize the inherent worth we have, not worthlessness. And when we see that worth, we can also see better how the sin disrupts our relationship. And that's where Jesus comes in, because Jesus teaches us a better way to live. We have a new way to live. Jesus died so that we could be ushered into a new way of being that was radical and different, bringing life instead of death. An original blessing brings us a new way to view the world. It will literally shift our worldview. One of the other things that Danielle said that really spoke to me was how original blessing puts emphasis on how everyone in the world are beloved children of God with whom God has and seeks relationship. If we recognize this, then we also start to see others as beloved by God. She asks, what would it look like if we were to see the world the way God sees the world? Let's think about that. How much would our actions change if we saw the world as God's good creation? How would that change how we treat creation and our natural resources? How would we begin to see and treat others if we started to understand that God loves them just as much as God loves us? How seriously would we start to take the love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you, as we learned about just a few weeks ago? What would happen? And that is the challenge of original blessing. If the starting point of our faith becomes our worth and not our worthlessness, then how does that change all of our relationships? With God, with each other, with creation? How does this radically alter our worldview? And these are questions to be explored as we continue our Lenten journey together. So I challenge us to claim this idea of original blessing and follow our God who continually calls us and desires a relationship with us, no matter what. Amen. Please join me in singing our hymn, number 276, Great is Thy Faithfulness.